Welcome to Metabolic Body Composition. This is Lewis Burns. In this episode, we're going to continue on with the asked questions. This episode will be about diet and nutritional concepts. First question, can you explain what the keto, ketovore, carnivore, and paleo diets are and how they differ? I certainly can. The paleo diet was one I was on the longest, and it was based on eating like our ancestors would have, which means if it didn't appear in nature, it wouldn't have been part of the diet. So it would have included things like all meats. You can imagine what a hunter-gatherer could have come up with. And they draw also a lot from current hunter-gatherer tribes. So they eat a lot of meat. They allow non-starchy vegetables like tubers, like potatoes, nuts and seeds, some dairy, fruits. So pretty much anything that you could find in nature. Now, some of the issues with a paleo diet is that some of the initial thoughts about it were not entirely correct. Just because it comes from nature doesn't mean it's always been there. Most of our fruits and vegetables didn't exist in their current state even 1,000 years ago, which is just a blip in terms of human evolution. And if you think in terms of if nuts were part of our diet, you have to consider how much we would have had access to. I've heard the Hadza tribe, at least the males, will eat honey almost every day. But I think most of human evolution, we wouldn't have had access to honey every day. And you think about nuts, a lot of people will eat a lot of nuts and nut products. Almond flour is very popular in the paleo diet, so they're consuming a lot of almonds. As a hunter-gatherer, you would have only eaten as many as you could harvest in a day and then peel the shells off. If you eat more than 5 or 10 nuts, you're tired of picking shells off, even if you have the proper tools. Identifying what a true paleo diet would have been, it obviously varies from, even in modern tribes, it varies based on the environment and the location, what they have access to. I think what we can say for sure is that people have always eaten what they can get their hands on, whatever they can prepare. I think paleo is definitely a step above a standard American or Australian diet that is a lot of processed foods. But I think one thing that all these diets have in common is that they try to reduce the amount of processed foods. Another thing about paleo is we wouldn't have had access to hardly any sugar, if any at all. So a keto or a ketogenic diet is defined in the literature as having a diet that brings your metabolism to a level of ketosis that they measure at 0.5 millimole per liter of ketones in your blood. So what that basically means is that you've reduced the number of carbohydrates so that your body starts producing ketones as fuel. Now, the number of carbs is going to vary by individual. Usually the recommendation for actual ketosis is less than 20 carbs per day. Apparently and with everyone's variations, it's going to change. Some people it needs to be less than 10. Some people, they just need to not have any carbs at all. The keto diet has been used for over 100 years to treat epilepsy. And they found that it was good for other things too over the years. That original epilepsy diet was very low in protein. My understanding is they were concerned about insulin spikes from too much protein. It's not clear that there have been trials to determine what the level is. I think individually you may be able to figure it out if you wear a continuous glucose monitor, but I'm not aware that's really been fleshed out in the research. The carnivore diet, people define it differently, depends on how strict you're being with it, but it's essentially only animal products. There's debate about whether that includes dairy or not. I find it difficult to moderate dairy, and I notice differences in my bowel movements when I have very much dairy, but I'll put a piece of cheese on my hamburger without much issue. There's some flexibility in terms of whether people want to think about seasonings or artificial sweeteners. It depends on how you want to qualify it. Some people have pointed out that in biology, they label a hypercarnivore as any animal that consumes more than 70% of its calories from animal products. So that leaves a lot of leeway in terms of what we call carnivore. I think it's important to focus heavily on animal products and then figure out what other flexibility might work better for you. Now, Ketovore diet is a carnivore diet that is low enough in carbs to be ketogenic. With the ketogenic end of it, they also allow for some low-carb plant source foods like low-carb berries or green leafy vegetables. I think some people would consider this the most evolutionary consistent because we do have evidence that Neanderthals and other human species were consuming some amount of plants. I don't think we can say how many plants they were consuming or whether they were the garnish level or just whatever they happen to be walking by. I know if I'm hiking, I certainly see some berries and know that people will eat them as they're walking by. But just thinking back in terms of what a hunter-gatherer could have come across, the amount of gathering required to get the number of calories becomes a question of calorie density and efficiency in the effort it takes to gather these sources and consume them. If you feel that you need some green leafy vegetables, it's not clear how many you can tolerate or how that will affect you long term to include or exclude them. The Ketovore diet tries to get the best of both a ketogenic diet and a carnivore diet. Now, for completeness, I want to mention the Mediterranean diet. That's the other most popular diet, often recommended by the medical community. It's not actually a single defined diet. If you ask people what a Mediterranean diet is, they're going to think about olive oil. And if you think about all of the countries surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, North Africa, the Middle East, you've got a whole spectrum of European countries, and they all eat different things. So there's not a clear definition on Mediterranean other than people think it includes olive oil. And my understanding is the reason for that is that when they were first talking about it, a lot of it was marketing promotional material by Italy and Greece to promote their olive oil industries. A couple of studies I've seen that compare Mediterranean and low-carb diets, the low-carb come out better for the endpoints they're measuring. But if you're looking for a diet other than a standard American or diet, then Mediterranean is not a bad one. It's also lower in processed foods, so that's an improvement. So what's the difference between low-carb and low-fat approaches? When they've done randomized controlled trials and the endpoint was weight loss, the body composition results, when they keep calories and protein the same, they don't see a lot of difference. And that's been fairly consistent, replicated across time. Now, the metabolic effects are different. Tim Noakes did a reanalysis of the Women's Health Initiative. They found that low-fat diets were associated with worse heart health outcomes. Initially, that was buried, but Tim Noakes went back and found that in the data. My personal experience was that the low-fat diet messed up my digestive system. When I switched to low-carb diets, I found it easy to lose weight. When I wasn't doing calorie restriction, I didn't lose any weight. Not on paleo, not on low-carb, not on carnivore. So I think both things still matter. Another big difference I didn't mention before is a low-carb will offer you more consistent energy throughout the day. I found when I was on a low-fat diet, I was almost frantic waiting for the next meal. I was giving myself insulin spikes, hypoglycemia throughout the day. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I don't think it's necessary at all. So what is reverse dieting and how does that work? Reverse dieting is gradually increasing your calorie intake back to a maintenance level. some mistakes I made with protein-sparing modified fats is I didn't realize that when you lose weight, your maintenance level will be lower than it was before. And that's because you have lower body fat. You may have lost some muscle mass, depending on how you did it, how much exercise you included. Your basal metabolic rate will be lower because you won't be carrying as much weight around. But I just went back directly to eating the same way I was before, and I ended up the same weight that I was before. Doing a reverse means that you can prevent most of the weight gain people get after they go off a diet. You can do it at different rates too. The first time I did it as conservatively as possible, meaning that if my weight didn't increase more than 0.5%, I would increase the calories by 2%. And so it took a little longer to reverse than it did to lose the weight in the first place. Now, this last time I'd read some research saying that if you can accurately calculate your new metabolic rate, which I think for most people is completely infeasible, but if you have a better idea, then you can increase directly to it. So what I started doing was going halfway back and then halfway back. Instead of 2%, I would go up maybe 10 or 12% the first time, and then 6% the next time, and then 3%. And doing that, I was able to complete a reverse. You don't exactly complete it until you have stabilized your weight over a number of weeks. I think that took me a little longer because I do long hikes on the weekend. For some of the longest, most strenuous hikes, I'll lose up to 5 pounds, which makes it challenging to figure out what your average weight for the week is. So I actually reversed up to about 2,600 calories and found that my weight wasn't exactly stable. I've backed off a little bit, so now I'm around 2,500 calories. You have to play with that instead of just going back to what a calculator says your intake should be. I've never found calculators anywhere close. They usually, if I find that my maintenance level is 2,500 calories, the calculator will say it's 28 or 3,000 even sometimes. So I just have to go by the stability of my weight over time. And I don't just go by weight. I'll also look at my body fat composition. Another advantage of doing a reverse diet is that when you've been restricting, the volume of your food's been less, so your stomach may have shrunk just a bit. And increasing over time means that you allow your stomach to adjust to larger meals. And you don't have to be uncomfortably full all the time. It may not offer a significant metabolic advantage. I think because the first couple of times when I started a reverse, I was still in a calorie deficit the first few weeks. So I continued to lose weight beyond hitting the goal. Just be aware of that and plan for that. What are some common misconceptions about keto and carnivore diets? The number one is that calories still matter for weight management. Most of the time when people change their diet, they usually do it by excluding certain foods, whether that's going lower fat or lower carb, and they don't always replace those. When they exclude processed foods and they eat more whole foods, they find that they are more satiated and they end up eating less total food, fewer calories. And so they end up restricting without doing it intentionally or consciously. That's probably the biggest one. Another big one is that I hear a lot of advocates, nutrition and doctors say humans were designed to eat a specific way. But if we have a better understanding of evolution, we understand that it's not linear, and humans are not necessarily the peak of what is possible with evolution. Natural selection means there's a lot of guessing and going directions that aren't necessarily beneficial for everything we'd like to be. So I think we can say we evolved eating a certain way. But to say that we're designed is to introduce a little creationism that doesn't benefit our understanding of how we evolved. I think along with that is our modern foods, our fruits and vegetables, even our animals are different than what we evolved with. I think we may have been eating a lot of mastodons and woolly mammoths as we evolved. There's some theory that Our brains may have shrunk from the size of Neanderthals and possibly before that, based on having to hunt for smaller animals after we hunted all the elephant ancestors down to below sustainable thresholds. Another thing I don't hear, I think, talk about enough is the environmental factors. Be eating what might be an optimal diet, but we still have the microplastics, the forever chemicals. We have the air and water pollution. We have the fact that most of our soils are depleted. You may think that's fine because you eat the animals, but the animals are eating from the soil too. So they're getting the pesticides. The soil may not have enough minerals or iodine or whatever else is missing. For many people, that means we would benefit from some amount of supplementation. A lot of advocates say you don't need to supplement anything for a carnivore animal-based diet. That might be true to avoid disease, but if we're trying to do the best we can, more might be needed. While people can be healthy, just avoiding processed foods, animal products appear to be the best cost-benefit ratio for human health. It helps us to look in terms of cost-benefit because any particular food, when we look at mechanisms of human health, we have to remember that it's an ecology and not just a line that we can optimize for. Anything may have something that's good for us and something that's bad for us. And we just have to look at the big picture and see how it makes us feel and affects our health. People ask about fiber. A couple of the basics are that fiber is indigestible, meaning it just passes through people for the most part. The main arguments in favor of fiber are that it helps your gut bacteria, not you directly, and that some ketones can be fermented by your gut bacteria. The evidence is not sufficient to say that should be true for all humans. The main study they cite shows a dose benefit relationship between eating more fiber and all-cause mortality. Well, one of the problems with nutritional research is that we're often comparing an ultra-processed food diet to anything else. And so making that comparison, almost anything else looks good. And so when we're looking at the evidence, we can look at hunter-gatherer tribes and see they have none of the diseases of civilization. But we don't know any particular hunter-gatherer tribe that their gut bacteria, if we studied it, is the ideal. We don't know what the ideal is. So to say that we need to get ketones from our gut instead of in a ketogenic diet, they'll be coming from our body's endogenous production so that our body can regulate the amount of ketones it wants, can regulate the amount of glucose it wants instead of us putting it in and then the body having to react to that. That trial I mentioned about showing benefits of fiber, it's an associated study, so it can't show causation. I'm only aware of one controlled trial. It wasn't randomized because people were self-selected. There was one controlled trial on fiber that showed that the people who ate the least amount of fiber had the best outcomes. So it was people who came in, were showing constipation, and they also measured their other digestive problems. People self-selected into different groups, meaning they were counseled on the potential harm of fiber. And so all that wanted to completely eliminated fiber from their diet. And I think it was because of religious reasons, couldn't eliminate fiber from their diet or decided not to. And it was shown that the less fiber they ate, the better results they had. We don't have strong evidence supporting that fiber is beneficial. We do have some decent evidence showing that it is harmful. And so we need more research to make recommendations. That was one of the things about public health is their standard is usually if it could possibly benefit anyone, then it's recommended for everyone. And that's just not good for individual human health. So I wouldn't recommend fiber. I've had problems with fiber. After my first year on carnivore, I thought maybe a little bit of glucose would help my exercise. So I tried adding a little bit of fruit back in, and any of the things that I tried, whether that was like berries, I tried rice, I tried just powdered dextrose. Nothing that I took made me feel better than just going without it. So fiber and any carbs really aren't anything I could wholeheartedly recommend. So what about saturated fat and cholesterol? There was never solid evidence that supported all of the claims against saturated fat. It's funny, you go back and read some of the research, try to figure out how they know that saturated fat or cholesterol are a problem. Most of the studies are circular. I went and found a European consensus statement that basically said, we say this is bad because we said this was bad. You go back and look and it just points to each other without actually having any hard evidence that either of those things are bad for us. There's a few association studies. They've got a lot of confounding variable issues, but there's not really evidence showing causation. Most likely, oxidative stress and inflammation are some of the root causes of cardiovascular issues, not the fat or the cholesterol. We get that oxidative stress from ultra-processed foods, in particular seed oils and refined carbohydrates and sugar. Those are probably the most likely issues, not the saturated fat or cholesterol. So can I explain whether carbs make you fat or how fat gets trapped? I think it's interesting to watch the debates between hormones and energy balance. The state of the research is that we can't rule either one completely out. When they control for protein and total calories, carbs aren't uniquely fattening in a weight loss diet. It might be an issue of contributions of both theories. When you think about the psychology of a person and not just what you can make them do in a laboratory where every bite is controlled, people may tend to overeat carbs because they've been engineered to be hyperpalatable. So the trap fat is an interesting hypothesis that we need some more clinical trials to really support it better and find out to what degree that's going on. I think insulin resistance obviously has something to do with fat burning, but we still need more research on that. People talk about the Randall cycle, where your body can only burn fat or carbs, not both at the same time. My understanding of reading up on that issue is that really only starts to make a large impact when you have a calorie surplus and your body is trying to store some of those metabolites. There are definitely metabolic reasons for reducing your carb intake, but fat loss isn't really one of them. You can lose fat on any diet. So the question is, how can someone get started on a keto diet? You can start all at once or gradually. The Atkins diet was originally prescribed as taking 2 weeks of no carb and then adding carbs back in gradually. I think for some people that will give them digestive issues. I think it's going to depend on how you know yourself. If you know that you're someone that likes to jump into the deep end of the pool, or someone that likes to put your toe in first and then get used to the water gradually, that'll tell you a lot about how you should do this. Also depends on your previous dieting experience. If you've gone low carb before, then you may have an easier time going full keto. You also should take into account what your work environment is like. Some people, when they go on a keto diet, it has a much higher fat percentage than what they're used to, and their bile production may need to ramp up. Until it does, they might have some loose stools or need to go more frequently. It depends how your work environment is. If you work from home, you can get to the toilet quickly, that's fine. If you need to go most of the day without having a bowel movement, then you may want to get into it a little slower. If you're going to go gradually, you could do something like reducing your carbs to 100 grams a day, then 50, then 20, then what you need to. And of course, I'd recommend using as many animal products as possible. It is possible to do a vegan ketogenic diet, but it'd be really challenging, and I think you'd have to rely mostly on protein powders for your protein sources. The question is, what is the science behind the ketogenic diet? There's actually extensive research on the keto diet. PubMed has over 5,000 studies that come up. Google Scholar has over 162,000 studies. There's now a textbook, an entire medical textbook on the ketogenic diet. The first ketogenic diet for epilepsy paper was published in 1924. We have reason to believe that the paleo diets, the actual paleo diets that humans have been eating for going back 2 million years, have been almost entirely meat, or mostly meat, I should say, in terms of calories. People say that they were eating a significant amount of tubers also. And my understanding, even from current hunter-gatherers, is a lot of times they just chew on the tubers because they're much more fibrous than our modern potatoes have been cultivated to be. And so in terms of total calorie intake, most of our intake would have been from meat, mostly from fat. We have medical case studies on keto diets for diabetes going back from the earliest one I saw was 1797. We have probably the closest thing we'll ever have to a controlled trial comparing two indigenous tribes where they were living side by side, had the same genetics, and one was almost entirely carnivore, one was almost entirely vegetarian. So that's an interesting study to read up on. There's a lot of research on the negative effects of processed foods, seed oils, refined sugar. There's a lot of research on the benefits of animal protein sources. I've recently been reading up on essential fatty acids, where alpha-linoleic acid is listed as an essential fatty acid, but is unable to find anything that it does that can't be done by another fatty acid. So I think probably it's not essential in the strict sense of the word. In nutrition, essential means where bodies requires it, but can't make it itself. Now, EPA and DHA and ALA is mostly from plant sources unless you're feeding your chickens an enriched diet. But EPA and DHA are mostly from fish sources. That one is essential in the sense that your body requires it, but it can only make a very small amount. My understanding is 4% of ALA can be converted into EPA and DHA, which is not enough. There could be debate on whether EPA and DHA should be the essential ones. I think we can say with a fairly safe to say that EPA and DHA should be considered conditionally essential, if not actually essential. So there's just a lot of things that you can only get from animals. You can't get from plants. So we don't have long-term controlled diet studies on ketogenic or carnivore diets in particular, but we have lots of short to medium-term studies. And the things that we have studied long-terms still point towards the benefits of a ketogenic diet. Can I explain the concept of macro tracking and why it's important? Your macros are macronutrients, and those are things that we can derive calories from. That's protein, carbohydrates, fat, and a lot of people forget alcohol is actually a macronutrient as well. Tracking just means that you're able to make sure you're getting enough of the ones that you need. There are essential amino acids and essential fatty acids, but there are no essential carbohydrates or alcohols. It's probably controversial to say, but carbohydrates and alcohols are, I think, nutritionally about as valuable. Most people would say alcohols are less valuable than carbohydrates. You can benefit from going without either. Fructose is a carbohydrate, but it's metabolized the same way as alcohol in the liver. If you focus on essential amino acids and conditionally essential fatty acids from animal sources, there's still a lot of debate on how much protein you actually need. The recommended daily allowances are based on avoiding disease. And they're probably way too low if you're interested in optimizing your health or even improving it. When we look at the more optimal amount of protein, most studies are based on muscle protein synthesis, which is growing our muscles when we work out and stress our muscles so that they grow. Our body uses protein for more than just muscle protein synthesis. Now, I don't know if muscle protein synthesis is the last thing it uses protein for. I don't think that's the case. So for example, your bones are made out of protein. They're protein and mineral, and just like collagen is made out of protein, your skin, pretty much every cell in your body uses protein. Your brain uses protein, everything uses protein. So to say that muscle protein synthesis tops out at a certain level, we probably need more than that. Most likely we need more than that. And if we take a little more than that, then we're covered and probably good. That level for most people is going to be about 1 gram of protein for every pound of ideal body weight that they have. I think if you're doing that much, if you're trying to achieve other physical training goals, you may want to go higher. Some people can go up to 2 or 3 or even more grams of protein per ideal body weight. I think it's important to balance your protein and fat. For studies that look at populations eating carbohydrates, they see your kidney may begin to complain if you're eating more than 30 to 35% protein. Until we have more studies on ketogenic diets, your body may accept more protein without an issue, but I don't think we know that for certain yet. As long as you're eating fatty meats, your protein and fat intake ratios will be fine. Unless you're eating fish or a lot of seafood, you may want to consider supplementing with omega-3, the EPA and DHA fatty acids, because there won't be as much as you could benefit from in other meats. So the question is, what are the potential drawbacks of extreme diets like carnivore or keto? I think first you got to put it into perspective. If we asked a hunter-gatherer before modern Western diets were available and look at what we're eating today, they would say that's extreme. I think even agriculture might be considered extreme. If you asked a hunter-gatherer, you propose this idea to them that we're going to put everybody in one area. They won't be able to just migrate around like you guys do. And we're going to give them these cheap carbohydrates just so that they can have some calories and they can build our pyramids and they can build all these other buildings. They would think that's extreme. It still feels extreme even to this day. So to say that we might be eating like our ancestors did is extreme, I don't see it that way. But the social challenges of eating differently still exist. So I think in nutrition science, their general position is that if you reduce anyone's choice of foods, you're doing something really bad to them, and people should eat everything in some ambiguous amount of moderation, which of course all things in moderation is not a moderate statement in itself. I think a lot of people would agree that you don't need to eat everything that is available to be eaten. So you may get potential criticism from other people, especially doctors or dietitians who are not familiar with as much of the research that's available. May just be going off their training. There is a trade-off. If you've eaten a certain way and are used to certain tastes, if you want to be healthier, what I found was my taste adapted quite a bit. Initially, when I was making meats, especially a brisket, I would just coat it in different barbecue rubs, and same thing with ribs. And over the years, I found I add less and less of that to where now, if I'm making just for me, I'll only put salt. If I'm planning to share with guests, then I might add a little bit of white pepper or garlic powder, just because otherwise they're used to those flavors. So how do you ensure you get adequate nutrition on a restrictive diet? I think a properly structured low-carb, paleo, keto, or carnivore diet provide all the nutrition. But you got to make sure that the properly structured means you're including some variety in organ meat. I think if you're only eating steaks, then you're probably not getting all of the nutrients you would benefit from. So there's no diet that actually has all the vitamin D you need. If you're getting enough sunshine, then probably you're getting enough vitamin D, but in many parts of the world, it's just not possible to get enough vitamin D from the sun. Then if you were only eating steak, you're not getting any fish oil, your EPA, DHA. I think supplementation is not required for surviving. You won't develop scurvy. There's some vitamin C and meat content. Glucose competes with vitamin C at the cell receptors. So if you're not eating glucose, your body can do with a lot less vitamin C. I think you can get everything you need from your diet in terms of surviving. But if you really want to thrive and optimize, I think you need to look at supplementation. Many diseases, possibly most diseases, are caused by a lack of nutrition, not a lack of medication. Most of the things that are vitamins because there is a deficiency disease associated with them. If you look at the actual recommended daily allowances, your balanced, well-structured, low-carb, keto, carnivore diet provides pretty much all those things. But higher than your recommended daily allowances or certain nutrients are likely to be beneficial. Then I mentioned the soil depletion. It sounds like many people, if not most, would need to supplement with iodine, magnesium, and vitamin C. While we don't need as much of it, we can benefit from more of it than we can get from diet. Same thing with our B vitamins, probably creatine for most people that aren't eating as much meat as they can a day. Individual supplementation is going to vary. We know that even among things like vitamin D, there's a spectrum of how people respond to it. I think that's true for probably most nutrients. Even if there is a minimum recommended daily allowance, that's going to need to vary based on individual, not just gender and body size, but also based on your metabolic factors, your lifestyle, your environment, probably genetics plays a role. And yeah, it's the basics of diet nutrition for metabolic body composition. In our next episode, we'll be talking about weight loss strategies and challenges. We'll see you next time.